Let's bring in Ricardo Teixeira from a security sector publication, Protection Web. Ricardo, you are listening to those conversations. An emphatic Ronald Lamola in the end saying there will be no abrupt withdrawal of our troops there, because doing so will render them vulnerable given the situation there. But I want to start where the DA's hearting started, was when the DAMP kicked off the conversation, the debate right at the beginning, asserting that that mission is doomed, or was doomed to fail from the start, because it is underfunded, the soldiers are ill-equipped. Of course, this is not the first time we're hearing these allegations.
Yes, Mr. Hatting was quite correct there. We've been saying for at least a year and a half now, since the deployment was originally brought up as a potential mission in the first SADC meetings regarding the topic. We called out that this SANDF does not have the capability to conduct these missions. It's outside of their current capability in regards of the troops that we could deploy, the equipment that was available, and the funding that was available. And he was right to call that out. It's become a bit of an "I told you so" moment for a lot of people in Parliament who have been calling this out for a long time.
So, does that mean you agree with him?
Yes,
that we are now paying the price?
Yes, I mean, it's been 15 years of underfunding in the defense capabilities and in the defense force, and it's come back to bite us. We can now see what all those years of underfunding and bad leadership and bad policy and a failure of planning has resulted in. It's been clear to see. And yes, if I remember correctly, he also referred to the minister lacking the required leadership skills and calling her incompetent, although he wasn't the only one to do so, and calling on her to step down. And I think these calls are going to grow louder, and I think it is a fair call to make.
Indeed, he wasn't the only one to say so, to say NG must go. Several other speakers said the same thing. Julius Malema, the leader of the EFF, adding something else, saying the SANDF should also be criticized for what he calls their sluggishness. Yes,
Mr. Malema is completely correct as well. The leadership of SANDF is just as much to blame as the minister and the previous ministers before her. I mean, the chief of the Defence Force failed to answer many of the questions posed to him in Parliament last week. And it's been rumoured that many of these senior officers implored their chiefs to inform the president that this mission was not going to be possible and it would be a bad idea and that it was beyond their current capabilities. Although they didn't listen, and it's the chiefs have all been quite quiet in the last 2 weeks, and all we've really seen from them was the Gulf Day fiasco, which just shows where their priorities were.
The ACDP adding another question, saying, where was military intelligence?
Yes, again, a very good question, and I mean, there's a lot of intelligence around the battle that is still unclear. The fog of war is still thick. We won't really know what fully happened until we bring all the troops home. But it was clear that in the weeks leading up to the battle that there was a failure of intelligence to pick up and inform the troops and the minister and the president that M23 had improved their positions to the north and the northwest of Goma and Sake and were getting ready for an attack. And either of these calls were landed on deaf ears or they were heard and not adhered to.
There's a couple of things that I don't know whether I'm reading way too much into them. The Minister of Defense, NG Motshekga, talks about the events preceding the death of the 14 SANDF members. Says that in the weeks leading up to the deaths of our soldiers, there were intensified fights, which led to our forces being enveloped. She says there was heavy shelling of the base and there were ground attacks. But for me, there are gaps between that and then moving on to the next paragraph or sentence, which then talks about us having lost 14 So in other words, there is information for me missing, especially speaking as she was doing in Parliament, where you were expecting something of a more thorough report, which then says when the shelling of the base took place, when there were those ground attacks, when these soldiers were enveloped, this is what we did to protect them, or this is what we did to make sure that they don't, fall into danger, leading, of course, to the deaths that we have seen. And I'm trying to compare that, or to read that against what the Ngabayom Zikwangwa, who is an MP from the United Democratic Movement, and I'm giving him a bit of importance because I'm assuming that he would have gotten a briefing from his boss, the leader of his party, who is the Deputy Minister of Defense, and that's General Bantu Olomisa, who says our soldiers fought gallantly, but we were forced to surrender. There seems to me a lot of information is missing.
Yes, it seems the minister has her own version of events and seems to be towing the party line and trying to obscure some of the facts, in my opinion. The battle wasn't just a quick 1 hour firefight. It played on for several days. And in fact, the battle started on a Thursday, and then by the coming Monday, Goma had fallen. And there were several incidents that led to the deaths of our troops. Some are pointing towards a mortar attack regarding the injuries that were reported, but there are also troops that have sustained gunshot wounds and other shrapnel wounds, and they didn't all die in the same single day. They died on 3 separate dates. So yeah, I think the UDM member did definitely get a bit of a briefing from his boss, the Deputy Defense Minister, and the minister is still, she's playing down the events. I think she fails to understand the implication of the events and the magnitude of the crisis. And her speech just, again, further shows the lack of clear communication that has been coming from the Department of Defense and the Defense Force in the wake of these events. I mean, the statements have been late, many questions have gone unanswered, reports have lacked detail, and even the report that was given in Parliament last week, several members of the Joint Standing Committee called it vague and insufficient.
And it is for that reason that, listening and watching, I just felt the MPs fell very short. They didn't probe, in my view, the key questions there, because the history of this war has never been in doubt. The commitments that South Africa has made over the years since 1994, even evoking Mandela as MPs did, that all those things were never in doubt, or they were never really questioned, even though, or even after, perhaps I should say, other people suggested that no, these soldiers are fighting proxy wars. There are rich South Africans who are benefiting handsomely, and the reason those soldiers are there is precisely to protect their interests. But I think on the facts that we have on the table, and especially those that were tabled today, even though maybe like small bits and pieces of information, I reckon the MPs then failed to probe information, no matter how little that was put in front of them, perhaps not on a platter, but on a small side plate, which I think they could have exploited for the benefit of not only just the rest of us, so that we know, but especially the families who have lost their loved ones.
Yes, it is clear that the MPs failed to ask many of the questions they should have, and many questions, again, still go unanswered. And one thing that is clear, though, is that from the Joint Standing Committee hearing and from this debate, that a deep and official inquiry needs to be called for to take a good hard look at the events that played out and our Defence Force and figure out what exactly happened, why were the troops there. We know under which mandate they were there, although the department still calls it peacekeeping, even though it was an offensive mandate. We understand some of the reasons why they are there, but there are many questions around this deployment and the battle and the leadership decisions that need to be called into question, and there should definitely be an official inquiry followed by a defense review, because As was mentioned by Dr. Groenewald when he got up, the previous defense reviews were in 1998 and 2015, and the 2015 one has fallen far short from what was expected of it and had no policy planning behind it and no funding framework to see it through. So alongside a review of leadership and the decisions that were made, a proper review of the Defence Force is needed.
Ricardo, let me thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.